It's good to see you all this evening. We appreciate you being here as we join together for this Wednesday night Bible study. We are studying the book of Job on these Wednesday night studies, and we are trying to not get too bogged down in every verse of the book. We're not going verse by verse, but we're trying to certainly get a grasp on the meaning of the book and the way it sort of is laid out, the way it is formatted. So we know about Job's terrible afflictions. We know in chapter 1 he lost everything. Chapter 2 he lost his health. And then in the midst of all his agony, 3 of his friends came with the intention of comforting him, but they didn't. And last week, one of the verses that we studied last week, he called them miserable comforters. They certainly weren't good at what they were doing. They were miserable comforters. But they came, and Monty made this point when he was here recently to me. You got to give them some credit because they thought that Job was sinning. And the reason all this trouble had come upon him was because he was sinning. And what he really needed to do is repent and get right with God. They had a view that God blesses you. If you're being blessed, it's because you're doing good. And if you're suffering, it's because you're evil. And Job is certainly suffering enormously, and therefore he must be evil. And so they don't know what his sin is particularly. They're going to guess tonight as we study along. They're going to make some speculations about some things he might have done. He's going to deny it all. But they didn't comfort him because they were accusing him of doing wrong when he knew he hadn't done any wrong. I don't think that Job even necessarily denied the concept that if you're suffering, it's probably because you do evil. He's just saying that general principle doesn't apply in my case. In my case, I'm innocent. And so his 3 comforters speak. We kind of divide the book up into segments or speeches or rounds of speeches. So each of his 3 comforters spoke. One spoke, Job answered. The next spoke, Job answered. The third spoke, Job answered. And they went through that cycle twice. And that's sort of where we ended up last week. We are in chapter 22. And so the second cycle of speeches has come to a conclusion at the end of chapter 21, and Job's response at this point, chapter 21, verse 34, "How then comfort ye me in vain, seeing in your answers there remaineth falsehood?" So Job says, there's no comfort in what you've been telling me because it's not true. What you're saying about me is not true. And so Job is just going to continue to affirm his innocence. But as we have pointed out, as we've gone through thus far, Job increasingly he is accusing God. Increasingly he is saying, God has done this to me unfairly, unjustly. I don't deserve this, and God has put this on me. And so he keeps increasing his complaint against God, that this is not right, this is not fair. I don't deserve this, and God has put this on me. And so he took his hardships very well initially, but as his friends kept sort of hounding him, I think their attacks against him sort of probably compounded his frustration, and he speaks harshly against God as he goes along. All right, so we're at chapter 22, and Eliphaz again starts the next series of speakers, but now in this case, not all 3 of them will speak in this third round. Chapter 22, verse 1, Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, and so he's going to make his case. Again, we'll go kind of fast because they get a little more intense, they get a little more accusatory, but it's a lot of the same stuff that we've been talking about. But here Eliphaz is actually going to say, here's probably I don't think he has the proof of this, but he's going to speculate that these are the kind of things that Job had done wrong. Look at verse 5, chapter 22, verse 5. Is not thy wickedness great and thine iniquities infinite? For thou hast taken a pledge from thy brother for naught, and stripped the naked of their clothing. Thou hast not given water to the weary to drink. Thou hast withholden bread from the hungry. But as for the mighty man, he had the earth, and the honorable man dwelt in it. Thou hast sent widows away empty, and the arms of the fatherless have been broken. Therefore snares are round about thee, and sudden fear troubleth thee. Here, he's not speaking so much now in generalities. He's actually stating some specific accusations against Job. Here's the kind of things, Job, that you've been doing, and this is why God has come against you, because that's what happens. You do wickedly, and God will punish you in this life. Now, we know that view was obviously popular back so long ago, but here we are. We're probably more on the order of close to 4,000 years later, and there's still lots of people who think that in the world today, that if you're suffering, it's because God's mad at you. If you were doing right, everything would be going fine. And there's a lot of people who think that. But, just a casual look at the world today would prove that's really not. There's a lot of wicked people in the world who are doing very well. They're getting along just fine. And all through history, righteous people have suffered. The ultimate example being Jesus Christ himself. Look how Jesus suffered. A sinless man, absolutely, totally sinless, and look how he suffered. And so this principle just doesn't work. It's not biblical. It's not sound. Job's comforters are fully convinced it's true. And so they just keep upping their arguments against Job. Thoughts or comments, anybody? All right. Skip down, still in chapter 22. Again, we're not going verse by verse. Thomas.
What do you think verse 3 is talking about?
So he says, God doesn't really need you. He doesn't need what you have to offer. You can't help him. You can't hurt him. God is a sovereign God, and what you do is not affecting him as far as his being. He wants you to do right, but if you don't do right, you haven't changed God. So I think that's what he's saying. Verse 2, can a man be profitable unto God? No, you can't profit or hurt God. And then in verse 3, is it any pleasure to the Almighty that thou art righteous, or is it gain to him that thou makest thy ways perfect? So let's say you're a great guy, and you live a really good life. God's happy for that, but it doesn't benefit him any more than, He is independent of it. He doesn't need. I guess what I want to say is he doesn't need what we have to offer. He wants it because he knows it's in our best interest. But whether you do it or not doesn't change God. I think that's what he's saying right there. Wade?
I think he's making fun of it.
Say again?
I said, I think he's making fun of it. Because my translation, the New American Standard, says in verse 4, is it because of your reverence that he punishes you, that he enters into judgment against you? So I think he's saying, you've done all these good things, then why is God punishing you?
Yeah.
I think he's basically just making fun of Job for saying, you've lived a wonderful life. Then why are you getting punished?
Yeah, it's the same point. He's making the same point that he's been making in his other two speeches too. You're right. All right. So, still in chapter 22, skip down to verse 13. Thou sayest, now this is what Eliphaz is saying about Job. Job, you think, chapter 22, verse 13, thou sayest, how doth God know? Can he judge through the dark cloud? Thick clouds are a covering to him, that he seeth not, and he walketh in the circuit of heaven. And so Eliphaz accuses Job of thinking he can do as he pleases and God won't even find out. He accuses Job of denying that God is all knowledgeable, that God is aware. He's saying, Job, you think you can sin with impunity. You think you can sin and get by and nobody will ever find out. God won't even find out. That's what he's accusing him of. Now, that's not true about Job. But there's a lot of people, I think there's a lot of people in our world, always have been and still are, a lot of people who think they can sin and get by with it and no one will ever find out. It's not true. Eliphaz's observation there is an accurate one. It's a false claim to think that you can sin and God won't know about it. So, it's kind of interesting that in these speeches, some of the things that these say are true observations. And that's a true observation, but wrongly applied to Job. Verse 15, hast thou marked the old way which wicked men have trodden? So he said, haven't you learned, haven't you seen that the wicked men do things and how it turns out badly for them? Where's your knowledge of just human experience, Job? Have you marked that way? Have you not noticed? Have you not observed the way that wicked men have trodden and the things that have happened to them? Verse 21, he counsels Job, acquaint now thyself with him, God, and be at peace. Thereby good shall come unto thee. Receive, I pray ye, the law from his mouth, and lay up his words in thine heart. So that's what he wants Job to do. This will fix everything, Job. If you just straighten up, fly right. If you repent and get yourself back in line with God's will, then everything is going to be well with you. And then verse 23, if thou return to the Almighty, thou shalt be built up, thou shalt put away iniquity far from thy tabernacles. So again, the call to repentance. So that's Eliphaz's third speech, and Job responds to that beginning in chapter 23. In chapter 23, verse 1, Job answered and said, even today is my complaint bitter, my stroke is heavier than my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. Who's he talking about there? I wish I could find him. He's talking about God, isn't he? I wish I could have an audience with God. If I just had a chance to sit down with God and have a talk, plead my case with him directly, then we'd work this all out. Because all through this, you get the idea that Job's very confident in the life that he's lived. He's very confident in his innocence. All he needs is a chance to plead his case with God. These comforters are wrong. The accusations they're making against him are not true. If I could just find God and plead my case to him. Chapter 23, verse 11. My foot hath held his steps, his way have I kept and not declined. Neither have I gone back from the commandment of his lips. I have esteemed the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. That's a strong statement of his innocence and how he's lived his life. That's what he's saying. But in verse 16, he says, God maketh my heart soft, and the Almighty troubleth me. Even though I've done right, God has turned on me. And God has brought all of this upon me, and I didn't do anything wrong. I was keeping his law. I was doing right. I was living a pure life, and God has put all of this upon me. Now, in chapter 24, Job keeps speaking, and in chapter 24, he acknowledges that wicked people think that they can act with impunity, but Job is speaking in chapter 24, and he acknowledges that God is aware and that God will judge them. Just pick up a few verses here in chapter 24, verse 1. Chapter 24, verse 1. Why, seeing times are not hidden from the Almighty, do they that know him not see his days? So why do the wicked keep God? Nothing is hidden from God. Don't the wicked know this? Verse 15. The eye also of the adulterer waiteth for the twilight, saying, no eye shall see me, and disguiseth his face. Verse 19. Drought and heat consume the snow waters, so doth the grave those which have sinned. And verse 24, they are exalted for a little while, but are gone and brought low. They are taken out of the way as all other, and cut off as the tops of the ears of corn. And so Job is acknowledging there. He's not denying what these other fellows are saying, that God knows, God is aware, God punishes the wicked. He's not denying that concept. They're saying, remember Eliphaz said, you think that you can sin and God can't even see you sin. He can't see through the clouds. Job is saying, I never believed that. I never thought that. I always was aware of God's omniscience. He sees, he perceives, he knows. I've never denied that. Wicked people deny that. I've never denied that. That's what he's saying basically in chapter 24. Thoughts or comments, anybody? Wade?
Yeah. So me and Thomas, we were talking about it yesterday. He was telling me about people that he met that have been Christians, but they have fallen away because they feel like God had just left them. God had abandoned them. And that's kind of what Job was feeling like here, But of course, Job's a much stronger.
He was a lot stronger to start with.
He was a lot stronger to start with than he was. But you wonder how many people that once knew God have just fell away from God because their situation in life become hardened and they've got all these burdens. Now they feel like God is not present.
Yeah, it happens. That does happen. But the reason why it happens is because people have a wrong perspective, I guess I would say, the wrong perspective. If this life is the be-all and end-all, then it's not worth it. Why would we bother to serve God? Because what's going to happen, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. You're going to get old, you're going to get sick, and you're going to die. Now, I'm not a prophet, but I'm telling you, that's what's going to happen to you. That's what's going to happen to Thomas and Eric and Cole. It's what's going to happen to us all. And so if my service to God is dependent upon good health and prosperity, then I'm doomed, because I'm not going to have good health and prosperity forever. I'm going to get old and sick and die, right? And even before that, some other bad stuff could happen to me, So but I think the real problem with that outlook is it's a here and now perspective instead of a hereafter perspective, right? Thomas?
I was going to say, a lot of times, I think, going off of what you were saying, our perspective is different. It also goes back to the way that Job's friends were. A lot of us believe, like, hey, if I do good,
Yeah.
good things are going to happen. If I
Yeah.
do bad things are going to happen.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because Job, just like what my dad was saying, Job literally says in verse 8 of 23, look, I go forward, but he is not there.
Yeah.
And he says I go backwards, but he's still not there.
Yeah.
And then if you go down, he then goes to say, he is blaming God. Like he's saying, hey, God put this in front of me. But if you see, like, you keep going, he then goes, but he knows all. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
So that whole time, even though he's feeling like this pain in abandonment from God,
Yeah.
he still goes, I know he knows.
Yeah, Job is really in a quandary because he still believes in a righteous God, but he's saying what's happening to me doesn't fit what I have always believed about God. So he's in a real personal dilemma. He's having trouble. We knew, I don't know if any of you have ever known anybody that was of the Christian Science religion. Well, we knew a lady that was, and she was very devout in that religion. And they take this view to the maximum, that if you're sick, it's because of sin. And don't take medicine. Don't take any medicine. Just get your life right. They really take the view of Job's comforters to the full extent. And I've always thought, what a self-defeating religion that is. Because if you're sick, it's because you're sinning. Well, but the reality is every one of us is going to get sick and die at some point. So our religion just collapses at the end of life. If that's our view, then there's ultimately it's a failure. Your whole system of belief becomes a failure. That's what these comforters believe. But there's still plenty of people in the world who believe that. All right, so let's keep plowing forward here. So, in chapter 25, we have Bildad's third speech. Boy, it's short. Chapter 25 is the shortest chapter in the book, 6 verses, and he responds to Job's claims of innocence. Verse 4, chapter 25, verse 4. How then can man be justified with God, or how can he be clean that is born of woman? Behold, even to the moon, and it shineth not, yea, the stars are not pure in his sight. How much less man that is a worm, and the Son of Man, which is a worm. And so he said, Job is declaring his righteousness, and Bildad is saying, it can't be done. What you claim in regard to your innocence, and that you've been keeping the law of God, and that you've been doing right, nobody can do that. Nobody can be as good, Job, as you're claiming to be. So just give it up and stop that sort of false claim. So that's basically all there is to Bildad's third speech, and Job answers. So again, same pattern, followed again. Job begins to answer. In chapter 26, verse 1, Job answered and said, how hast thou helped him that is without power? How savest thou the arm that hath no strength? How hast thou counseled him that hath no wisdom? And how hast thou plentifully declared the thing as it is? So this is against Bildad, right? Basically saying, you're not any help to me, buddy. I'm going to tell you, what you're saying is of zero assistance. You're just not helping here. There's no comfort in what you have had to say. But, again, as we go along in this chapter, he acknowledges, so this is a response to Bildad. And Job is speaking in chapter 26. And he acknowledges God's greatness. Notice in verse 7. This is a sort of a famous verse. Chapter 26, verse 7. He's talking about God's great power. Infinite God. He stretcheth out the north over the empty space, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. He bindeth up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent under them, and so on. He's talking about the manifestations of God's power in his physical creation. So Job is answering Bildad and said, you're not much help to me, but I still believe in God. And I still believe that God is all powerful and all knowing. I've not come to doubt that at all, he says. That verse 7. Sometimes, one of the arguments that's made about the inspiration of Scripture is that sometimes we refer to it as scientific foreknowledge, that the Scriptures reveal things that were not known in the day that the Bible was written, and science has come to discover those things later on and confirm that the Bible was true, and that the only way that the Bible writers could have ever known those things the only way they could have known it is by divine revelation, because science didn't know it at the time. And so verse 7 is one of the verses that sometimes, and I think you've got to be a little bit careful about making that argument as strongly as some do, but I certainly believe it is a fair way of arguing the inspiration of Scripture. He hangeth out the north over the empty space. And astronomers tell us, that to the north, when we look to the north, there is, typically the night sky is full of stars, and billions of stars, even billions of galaxies of billions of stars. But to the north, in the night sky, there's nothing. Or he hangeth the north. What does it say? He stretches out the north over the empty place. That came to be understood, and it is more and more confirmed to the more advanced telescopes that they get and so forth. The last part of that maybe is even more interesting. He hangeth the earth upon nothing. What holds the earth up? What holds the earth up? Well, ancient men of Job's time, they devised all kind of crazy ideas about how the earth is suspended in its place. They've argued that the earth, that there's a strong man, and he carries the earth on his shoulders. Others have said, I've read where some of the ancient people had theories like that the earth was carried around on the back enormous elephants and so forth. Because they didn't understand how could the earth stay in its place relative to all the other heavenly beings. How does the earth stay in its place? It's got to be something. It's got to be sitting on something, doesn't it? It has to be something holding it up. And Job said that he hangeth the earth upon nothing. That's a true statement, right? There's no physical support holding the earth in its place. We understand, all of the heavenly bodies and their attraction to one another and so forth, and how, there's been a lot of scientific understanding about how things work in the physical universe. Men didn't know that in the time of Job. A lot of understanding has come to pass since Job said that, but what he said is true. Relative to that, I sort of take the position that the Bible, what's really impressive about the Bible is not so much the things that are included like that. That's a true statement. He hangeth the earth upon nothing. That's true. But what's more impressive than that is, to me, the things that were not included. Because if the Bible was written by men, they would have said, the earth is carried about on the back of turtles or elephants, or Atlas has got the earth on his back and his shoulders and he's carrying it around. If men had written the Bible, there'd be a lot of stuff included that would have been representative of the ignorance of the day, and it's not there. And the fact that it's not there, to me, is actually, I think, a stronger argument than the few statements we find like this that are stating truths. But I think what's not in there, which would have been included if men wrote this all on their own, is even more impressive. Thoughts or comments, anybody? All right, let's keep going a little bit further then. Let's see. Job says in verse 14 of chapter 26, "Lo, these are parts of his ways, but how little a portion is heard of him. But the thunder of his power, who can understand?" So he has spoken somewhat about God's great and infinite power, but he actually says it's beyond comprehension, it's beyond understanding. And that's true too. I think Job is right about that. But again, Job has not even come close to the point of denying God. Wade said he's known people who just left God altogether because things went bad in their life and they just gave up, lost faith in God. And sadly, others of us have known those kind of situations. Job is not there. He's not even close to there. But he acknowledges God's greatness and power and knowledge. He just doesn't understand how it's all how this all fits together and how this continues to happen to him. He continues, chapter 27, he continues to maintain his integrity, righteousness, his clear conscience. Look at 27, verse 5. "God forbid that I should justify you. Till I die, I will not remove mine integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast and will not let it go. My heart shall not reproach me so long as I live." I'm reading King James Version. If you're reading a newer version, verse 5 starts out as, I am not going to say you're right. I am not going to agree with you. The King James says, "God forbid that I should justify you." The idea is, God forbid that I would ever agree with you in these false arguments you're making against me. Till I die, I will not remove my integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast. So he continues to maintain, his innocence and his clear conscience. There's not any sin here. I'm not trying to hold back. I'm not trying to keep anything secret. I'm telling you, it's just not there. That's what Job says. And he warns his friends. Verse 11, he says, "I will teach you by the hand of God that which is with the Almighty will I not conceal. Behold, all ye yourselves have seen it. Why then are ye thus altogether vain?" And so he continues on. "This is the portion of the wicked man with God, and the heritage of oppressors which they shall receive of the Almighty. If his children be multiplied, it is for sword. If his offspring and his offspring shall not be satisfied with bread. Those that remain of him shall be buried in death, and his widows shall not weep." And so on he goes. So he's telling them that he understands how God deals with the wicked and the things that the wicked can expect to receive. He's not denying that. He's affirming his own innocence, but he's not denying the justice of God and the punishment of those who do evil. He's still talking. So Bildad had a real short speech. Job got a rather long response to that. Chapter 28 continues his response. We'll try to go quickly here because a lot of this is just repetitive stuff. In chapter 28, he says, men have figured out some things. He starts out, surely there is a vein for the silver and a place for gold where they find it. Iron is taken out of the earth, brass is molten out of stone. So men have figured out how to do some stuff. They know how to find silver. They know how to find gold. They know how to make iron. But when I get down to verse 12, and he continues with some enumerations of things men have figured out to do. But down to verse 12, but where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? And so you might find gold. I'll tell you something harder to find is true wisdom. And he says men haven't been good at doing that. Verse 16, it's talking about wisdom. It cannot be valued with the gold of Ophir, with the precious onyx or the sapphire. The gold and the crystal cannot equal it, and the exchange of it shall not be for jewels of gold, he says. He's talking about wisdom. Men have figured out some stuff, but they haven't figured out true wisdom. God is the source of true wisdom. Verse 23, God understandeth the way thereof, and he knoweth the place thereof, for he looketh to the ends of the earth and seeth under the whole heaven. So God has true knowledge. And so although men by their inventiveness can figure out some things, true wisdom belongs with and comes from God. Any thoughts or comments? Anybody? We're going kind of quick. I think, but this all lines out pretty well for us, and understanding how it comes from Job back to his friends after they've spoken to him. In chapter 29, he's still speaking. This is his response to Bildad. In chapter 29, verse 1, moreover, Job continued his parable and said, and so he's continuing. Verse 2, oh, that I were as in months past, as in the days when God preserved me, when his candle shined upon my head, and when by his light I walked through darkness. As I was in the days of my youth, when the secret of God was upon my tabernacle, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were about me, when I washed my steps with butter, and the rock poured me out rivers of oil, when I went out to the gate through the city, when I prepared my seat in the street, the young men saw me and hid themselves. The aged arose and stood up. The princes refrained talking and laid their hand on their mouth. The nobles held their peace, and their tongue cleaved to the roof of their mouth. So he's saying, he's remembering the days before all of this calamity became upon him. He's remembering he was a highly respected person. He was the greatest man of the East, it says at the start of the book, right? And so when he came into the city, the young men got out of the way, out of respect. Here comes Job. You better duck your head and behave yourself. And the old men stood up in respect to him, and we're glad to hear what he might have to say. The princes, he says there in verse 9, they stopped talking. Put their hand on their mouth. The nobles held their speech, and so forth. So he's remembering how it was in his former days when everything was going well with him. Skip down to verse 12. Yes, Monty.
In verse 2, when he says, he's talking about the way things were, he says, in the days when God watched over me, he's assuming at this point that God's not watching over him anymore.
Yeah.
But because we have access to knowledge he didn't, we know that in the first round, God put limits on them.
Yeah.
In the second round, God put limits on them.
Yeah.
God is still watching over him.
Yeah.
And so like we mentioned, someone mentioned tonight about people that's just gone away from God because they said God's abandoned. We're not aware of what help and what benefit God is doing for us. Just because things are going tough for us doesn't mean that God's abandoned us. He very well may have limited the devil and what he can do to us. We don't know. through His providence, He accomplishes things, and He's watching out for us.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And we've brought in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, He's not going to let you be tempted above that you're able to bear. And so He's still doing that, as Monty says. God's still there. And God is not putting on Job any more than He knows Job can handle either. That's a good point, I think. So Job has said, I think Bonnie makes a good point there in verse 2, that he thinks God, oh, for the days when God preserved me or watched over me. God's still there. And so again, that's one of Job's faulty accusations against God, that he's going to be called on here pretty quickly as the storyline goes on. Verse 12, notice what he claims that he had done. Notice the good things. In other words, I've been good. I've been a good person. And he's actually going to, you don't like to, sometimes we say you don't like to toot your own horn. You don't like to pat yourself on the back. But Job has been driven to that by now. I mean, with all these false accusations of things that he has done. And again, as we said, they're getting more specific in what they're trying to accuse him of. So he is driven to the point of actually trying to enumerate some of the good things that he had done in his life. Look at verse 12. I delivered the poor that cried, and the fatherless, and him that had none to help him. The blessing of him that was ready to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My judgment was a robe and a diadem. I was eyes to the blind, and feet was I to the lame. I was a father to the poor, and the cause which I knew not I searched out, and I brake the jaws of the wicked, and plucked the spoil out of his teeth. Now, you guys say what you want to say about me, but I'm going to tell you, I honestly, it's kind of interesting. We're already in chapter 29 before he gets around to sort of, okay, I'm going to tell you. He hasn't tried to enumerate his good deeds before, but here he's actually been driven to the point where he feels the necessity to do that. I like that. Verse 16, I was a father of the poor, and the cause which I knew not I searched out. You get the idea he's saying there that I was even looking for it. I wasn't just taking the opportunities that were presented to me. I was actually out there searching for opportunities to do good for people who needed help. And you have to believe that he's absolutely telling the truth there. That's the kind of man that he was and the kind of life that he lived. Even though he had lived that way, skip to verse 30, or chapter 30 rather. But now, so this is what I remember how it used to be. I remember how I was highly respected, and I was actually busy doing good things. But now, chapter 30, verse 1. But now they that are younger than I have me in derision, whose fathers I would have disdained to have set with the dogs of my flock. He said, I was highly respected before. Princes wouldn't speak. My president honored me. But now these young people, he says, they disdain me. And he says, they have no standing. He said, their background is, their father, I wouldn't even have put their fathers in charge of the dogs that run with my flocks. He said, so he says that's the way it has gotten now, and he goes on with that how bad it has gotten and how it is now. He's not respected, and he's really put upon, and people have no respect for him whatsoever. But again, here he gets. He brings it back to God. Verse 20, chapter 30, verse 20. I cry unto thee, and thou dost not hear me. I stand up, and thou regardest me not. Thou art become cruel to me. With thy strong hand thou opposest thyself against me. And so he is blaming God now. That the reason. So what a dramatic change from a guy who was probably the most respected person in the land. Wealthy, powerful, and highly respected, very well honored. Now he's fallen so low that even these young men who he said, I wouldn't put their fathers in charge of my dogs. And they disdained me. They looked down on me. They cast off on me. And it's your fault, God. It's because of what you did, God. You did this to me. You have affected this total reversal in my standing. It's unjust and it's unfair. And then verse 26, he says, when I looked for good, then evil came unto me, and when I waited for light, there came darkness. And basically, again, he's saying, all of this happened, and there wasn't any just cause for it to happen to me like it happened. And so that's what he's saying. Now, he's going to continue, and we're out of time. He's going to continue this in chapter 31, talking about, or actually asking, if I've done this, I deserve this if I've done this, but I haven't done this, is the way chapter 31 is going to lay out. And Lord willing, we'll pick it up there next week. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you for being here.